Okay, and we are live. All right. Welcome, Dr. Myers. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining me. We had a LinkedIn exchange. I've known about you and your work for many years. Got the pleasure of meeting you many years ago. You are the founder and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So apt to have you as a guest to share your perspective, words of wisdom, and also expertise with our audience. This recording is primarily in part to be a supplement to a session that I'm providing to the American College of Surgery's Clinical Congress. The session is entitled Opportunity Revolution: How to Be a Successful Surgical Entrepreneur. So I couldn't think of anyone better suited to bring us some insights.
Thank
Uh,
you.
and for the audience, Dr. Myers, for those that don't know him, Dr. Myers is a professor emeritus of otolaryngology, dentistry, and engineering at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, and he's the president and CEO, as I mentioned, as well as founder of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs.
And
Uh,
just to be clear, I'm a co-founder
Co-founder
because I don't want to get my other founders angry at me. So let's be clear. I'm a co-founder.
co-founder Society of
Uh,
Physician Entrepreneurs. Well,
Thank
welcome, welcome, and we're going to get a lot more into your background as our conversation evolves.
you.
And so, the burning question, of course, would be, uh, why did you and your founders start and establish a Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, and what
Right.
is it that that organization does?
Sure. So thanks for asking that. So this is sort of like entrepreneurship 101 because like you, and congratulations on what you've done, I felt that I identified an unmet need
Hmm.
and identified people that were interested in filling the gaps um, using a viable business model. Now, the answer to your question directly, when I was during my clinical tenure at Colorado, and as you mentioned, I'm a otolaryngologist by training, subspecialty in head and neck oncology, subspecialty in basically oral cancer. So I wrote a lot of stuff. We did a lot of research, published papers, et cetera, et cetera. And uh, during the course of that tenure, myself and several other people invented a gadget that optically detects cancer in the mouth. Um, and at the time, while I had graduated business school in 1984, this was in the late 90s kind of thing.
Hmm.
I had been involved in multiple initiatives, I would call them. They were kind of the next step above an idea. They were by no means a product. They weren't a technology. Frankly, I didn't know what I was doing. I was clueless, as most white coats are who have an idea but don't know what to do with it.
Hmm.
So I invent myself and other folks invent this gadget. Um, and without going through all the gory details, we went through tech transfer, we did all the stuff you're supposed to do, but we never got it over the goal line.
Hmm.
And I'm saying to myself, this isn't right. I mean, this isn't right because I can't be the only one that has an idea and is clueless about what to do with it. And more importantly, I really couldn't find the resources and the people I needed to help me get it over the goal line. Was tech transfer useful? Yeah, but that's not commercialization. Well,
Right.
as well as everybody know. It takes all the stuff to get it to a patient. So I said to myself, I'm going to look around, see if I can sort of help figure out how to do this. It is not being taught in a medical school curriculum, it meaning innovation and entrepreneurship. It wasn't at the time.
Hmm.
Fortunately, there's sort of cracks in the armor to the point of what we just discussed before. Most medical societies, specialty medical societies, do not teach it or think it's important to offer to their members, including local and regional and state medical societies. Now, again, things have changed. I'm talking about where I was 15 years ago.
Hmm.
Fortunately, things have evolved.
Hmm.
But what I learned from that experience was one, every white coat thinks they have a good idea. The white coat being, yeah, doctors, engineers, scientists, basic scientists, anybody that calls themselves a white coat, with the
Hmm.
exception of the ice cream salesman, thinks they have a good idea. Second, it's probably just an idea. It's not something that has any commercial value. And I'm certainly not downplaying the value of basic science. I understand the culture of academic medicine, research, dollars, publications, grad students, circle, 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 rinse, watch, repeat. But even if you had a good idea that could have potential value to a patient or to the system, you wouldn't know what to do with it. You
Hmm.
wouldn't know how to do that. And that's what inspired us to create the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs to address that unmet need. So, the Society is a global, nonprofit, open biomedical and clinical innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. I describe to people that it's basically a cross between Rotary and Match.com. We're a big dating service. And if you need help identifying a person to help you get to the next step, that's basically what we do. It's an open network, so anybody can join. I fundamentally believe that sick care cannot be fixed from inside. It has to be fixed through outside in, inside out collaboration with tangential or edge industries,
Hmm.
aerospace, all that stuff, IT, artificial intelligence, which you know everything about, that kind of thing. So that's basically how we set it up in 2011. So now it's 12, 13 years to be sort of famous overnight. There's still a lot of, gee, I didn't know you guys were around. So hopefully when you watch this, you'll know, yeah, we're around. We're here to help you. So that's the basic idea. The business model is a subscription model. So it costs $80 a year, which is like chump change. And in fact, if you're a resident or a fellow or whatever, we give you a break and it's $25. So it's really a no-brainer. I mean, you're going to spend more on coffee today than you will joining this thing. So if you're really interested in doing this, money shouldn't be the object. And we have international chapters. So that's the story. Um, and that's how I wound up doing it. And I guess I had absolutely, first of all, I was clueless how to do this. This being, how do I get my idea to a patient? And secondly, how do you create a not for profit to do what we're doing as a social entrepreneur? I had no idea how to do that. So I guess my point is embrace the unknown,
Hmm.
figure it out. And it's a tip. So, what's it going to take for you to be a surgical entrepreneur? Think twice before you say no.
Mm.
Now, on the other hand, there's a strong argument for saying no. That is, you get too involved with too many things and you don't focus. So say yes to the right things, say no to the wrong things.
Hmm. Well, thank you for that. That's excellent background to segue into our conversation. And this is an audience primarily of surgeons, of course, at the American College of Surgery. You, of course, are a surgeon, so you know our culture, our background, our sort of
Yeah,
DNA composition.
sure.
Um, but what are the fundamentals of entrepreneurship? I would imagine that like you, many people have ideas, but what is it about an entrepreneur, a
Right,
surgical entrepreneur in particular,
right.
that are sort of foundational things that any
Okay,
audience should know?
right. So let's start with the definition of entrepreneurship. I mean, what are we really talking about? Because if you ask 100 people,
Hmm.
you're going to get a different, everybody got a different answer. What is value? What is innovation? What is entrepreneurship? Everybody's going to give you a different answer. It's like pornography. So you know it when you see it. So it's like, let's start with the definition so we're all on the same page. My definition is entrepreneurship, in this case, physician, in this case, surgical entrepreneurship, is the pursuit of opportunity. Now we're talking about sick care,
Hmm.
parentheses. We don't have a healthcare system. We have a siloed, sick care system of systems that masquerades as a healthcare system. So, one of the overlying themes of SOAP is, and actually our vision, you hear all this about vision statements and all that stuff. So, our vision really is to satisfy the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is to close global health outcome disparities. Our mission is to help our members get their ideas to patients because we believe the pathway to achieving the vision is innovation and entrepreneurship. So, physician surgical entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity under, and as a Navy person, you should understand this, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous conditions.
VUCA.
VUCA, it's a war college term.
Yeah.
The goal, more importantly, is to create user-defined and stakeholder-defined value through the deployment of innovation using a viable business model to achieve the sextuple aims. Now, that definition has 6 parts to it, and we can drill down and go down a rabbit hole for each one, but that's what we're talking about. The fundamental is, the point of all this is to create user and stakeholder defined value. What you think is valuable is totally irrelevant. It does not matter. You may think that you are the smartest person in the room because you've been told that since you're 5 years old, doctor. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the dog going to eat the food? So that's the definition. That's what we're talking about. Okay. So how come some doctors, white coats, do that and others don't? And there's a lot to this, but I'm going to summarize it because basically humans are incapable of learning more than 3 things at any one time and remembering them. So I'm going to sort of stretch the envelope and give you 5. So here, what I think are the 5 M's. Doctors need mnemonics. We always need to remember the cranial nerve. We make things up. So these are the 5 M's. In what I think is the order of importance: mindset, motivation, means, marketing, and metrics. So that's the answer to your question. Now, if you want, we can go into every one of those, but that's what I think people need to be successful as a surgical entrepreneur.
Yeah, just repeat those one more time, and then I want to focus in on one of them in particular.
Okay, so mindset, motivation, means, marketing, brand, and metrics. And by metrics, I mean, how are you tracking your progress in a personal and professional development plan that you're trying to develop the knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies to practice physician entrepreneurship, which is very different than clinical entrepreneur. The clinical mindset is different than the entrepreneurial mindset. The competencies required to be a competent doctor is different than a competent doctor entrepreneur.
Right. Exactly. So I'd like to start by focusing on that mindset, that first M. The reason why is because, as you mentioned, and I've watched a lot of your educational videos and your writings and teachings, and I would encourage our audience to do the same, and we'll make this available to them. And that is, you talked about there being a distinct difference between the clinical and the entrepreneurial mind, right? Just sort of outright. And we're not trained to be entrepreneurs per se in our career of medicine, particularly in surgery, when you kind of be really focused on this clinical, sort of discipline of ours. But you mentioned something about having some attributes that give you the right mindset, and you even went it so far, at least in one of the presentations I saw you did. You went so far as to say some people just don't have it. And now we're assuming that people that are in this audience that are listening to this are interested in entrepreneurship. They may have all the elements to be superstars as entrepreneurs, but some people may not have it. So I want to spend time on that mindset, because I think, in the hour that we have together with our audience, and
Right.
hopefully they'll go and learn more. That mindset, I think, is really important, because once you take that sort of step forward, you should have the right mindset, in my opinion.
Right. So let's just talk about focus on mindset. So what is a mindset? A mindset basically is how you make sense of the world. So everybody's, got the same sense organs, but some people, everybody sees it differently. And so this really has to do with how you see the world and make sense of it. The clinical mindset and the clinical culture of medical education is a culture, for example, of competition and conformity. We didn't get into medical school because we played nice with everybody else. We got in because we competed from the first element where we decided, or someone else decided, we should be a doctor. And that perpetuates through high school, college, med school, and even in residence, and even in clinical training, and even when you start in clinical medicine. We don't play nice together. It's competitive. And that's just the way it is. That doesn't have to be that way. And I'm trying, and other people like me are trying to change the dark underbelly of medicine, but that's the way sort of it is. In contradistinction to the entrepreneurial culture, which is collaboration and creativity. So the last thing in the world you want to do as a doctor is practice outside the guardrails. Evidence-based medicine, disruptive physician, doing what you're supposed to do, not doing what you're not supposed to do no harm, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's how we grew up. Now, when you want to make this transition, you have to change your mindset.
Yeah.
And as I said, this is about creating value. Now, I think it's cruel and unusual punishment to say to doctors, that is the 75% of the roughly 1 million doctors who are employed, we want you to create value, value-based care. We want you to create value, all this value, value, value. But we're not going to teach you how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's cruel and unusual punishment. That is not fair. It creates moral injury, and it's a total waste of time and money. So until or unless we change that mindset, not just of the individual, but of the organization and the system, it's going to be difficult to align these objectives so that we get what we want out the bottom of the funnel.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's point number one. Point number two is, so what does an entrepreneurial mindset look like? Well, actually, there's been a lot written about this. I would refer you to a book called The Entrepreneurial Mindset, or Innovator's DNA. It's a Clayton Christensen thing, part of all his books he's written and all that stuff. And again, the acronym and the tip I would give you is, if this is something that you're thinking about doing, and to your previous point, there's a big argument about whether entrepreneurship can be taught. Of course it can be taught. Can it be learned? That's another story. And I do this now for a living. I teach all over the place. And my attitude is not exactly new. It goes back 3,000 years to Socrates. I can't teach anybody anything. I can only get them to think. You have to do it. I can't teach you this stuff. You have to sort of integrate it and do something with it if that's what you want to do. And my back of the envelope is, again, roughly 1 million practicing physicians in the United States. My experience is maybe 1% to 2% of them have an entrepreneurial mindset. It's not their fault. That's how you get into medical school. That's how you get into graduate school. That's how you get to be a pharmacist. You cross the T's, you dot the I's, you take the tests, you say what you need to say to get in. That's what I did. That's how I got in. I'm not creative genius. I just played by the rules so I could get in. But it has unintended consequences. Um, so the mindset, and the other point I would make is that we're not talking about person. There's a difference between personality, character, um, and mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Your personality, the psychologists tell us, kind of fixed when you're 8 years old or 10 or whatever. Your character is a whole another story, whether you're a good person or a bad person. But the good news is that your mindset can be fixed. It can be improved. You can change it. It takes practice, but you can do this. So when I say this, what does that mean? What am I supposed to fix? Well, again, I'll give you the acronym. So what I'd suggest you do is you look yourself in a mirror and you subject yourself to something I call the CEO Q&A session. CEO Q&A. I'm stealing this from other people,
Right.
but it's my sort of sexy, funny, tongue-in-cheek, pain in the neck way to do it. So here's what you need. So what are the elements? There's a lot of elements. There's a lot of defined competencies, but the basic elements of the mindset are: the C is connectivity. You have big networks, and we can talk about each of these things. The E is you like to experiment. This should come as second nature to doctors in white coats for obvious reasons. That's what we do.
Right.
Clinical trials, and we're going to do a clinical result thing, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, we try something else. I mean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We know the scientific method, the whole drill. So that's the E. The O, so there's connections, there's experimenting, there's observing. So there's all these sayings about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs don't look at things, they see things that others don't see. Same data set, same follow the dots book. But when you connect the dots, you see something different than what everybody else sees.
Right.
The Q&A is you're a questioner. How come we don't do it this way? I mean, every single doctor I know goes to work and says to themselves, why are we doing things this way? I mean, this isn't working. Why doesn't somebody fix this? That kind of thing. So what if? Suppose, why can't we, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're constantly questioning. Now, the bad news to that is you're going to be a pain in the ass.
That's right.
And you're going to have the scars to show it. And believe me, you can, I can. I mean, God knows
you might get in trouble too.
Exactly. Well, you might get you could get thrown out of medicine. You could be labeled a disruptive physician, and that's a whole nother interesting thing. You're a disruptive physician when you and I throw a scalpel in the OR, which God forbid I've never done, but people do it. You're labeled a disruptive physician. But these days, your employer wants you to be a disruptive physician in the sense of the business. They want you to change the system, if not make it obsolete. There's a very fine line between being a pain in the neck and a bad rebel and a constructive team player being a good rebel. And you have to navigate these things because there's a conflict of cultures. So that's the question part. And possibly the most important one is associating. Q, questioning. A, associating. Associating means you connect the dots. In other words, there's so many things going on in the world: technology, people, generations, generational attitudes, you name it. Everything that's going on in the world that has nothing to do with medicine informs medicine. And if you don't connect those dots, then that's part of the entrepreneurial mindset. So you have to be someone who can do that. And, there's an old job saying, innovation is about connecting dots
Mm-hmm.
and your ability to do that. Now, as I said, the good news is, so if you do a personal professional development plan, one of the competencies and the mindset that you're going to have to develop, it's like Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. If you read it, he's got like 7 or 8 virtues, and Monday through Sunday, he's going to do a different one.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So pick these 5. Rate yourself right now 1 to 10. It's like emotional intelligence grids.
Mm-hmm.
Rate yourself 1 to 10. It is what it is. Here's where you are. Here's where you want to go. Here's how you're going to get there. And you're going to practice this stuff. And there are ways to do it. Now, it's like saying, well, you want to be a thoracic surgeon? No problem. It takes a while to learn how to do that. It's not going to happen overnight.
Right.
And the surgical, and I tell people, I don't know what your experience is, but I tell people after teaching people, as a professor of surgery, I can't teach people how to be surgeons.
Mm-hmm.
I can teach them how to do surgery. Mm-hmm. And to your point, I think probably 15, maybe 20% of entrepreneurship is nature, and the rest is nurture. And I would do yourself a favor if you go through these exercises, and at the end of this webinar, are you saying, huh? Do yourself a favor. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Save us a lot of hassle. If you don't want to be an otolaryngologist, don't apply for our residency. It's just going to apply brain damage when we have to throw you out of the program. Mm-hmm. Don't do it, please. And, oh, by the way, I need a doctor, and doctors are hard to find. So just be a doctor. Take care of folks because we don't have enough of them.
All right.
So that's what I would suggest you do.
Well, that's excellent. I will say, and I'm glad you went through those steps again with the CEO QA.
Yeah.
And I've heard you speak before and lay it all out. And I will say, inadvertently, not knowing, what your construct was going to be, I said, hey, I think I fall into that category. I may have stumbled into it. Right. I wanted to be an artist. I got into art school. I still love art.
Right.
And my dad wouldn't let me go to art school because he said I'm not going to make any money as an artist.
Right.
So when you talked about having a creative mind, I was like, see, that actually did come in to be helpful. And by indoctrination, consequence, circumstance, going to be deployed in all kinds of places, the collaboration part came into play because I spent 25 years of my career in the Navy.
Right.
And
let me just add another point, and that is that there is such a thing as an innerpreneur. Mm-hmm. So entrepreneurship is typically described as someone who's going to create a company. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really short-sighted, given my definition, it's a very short-sighted definition, particularly in medicine, because there's lots and lots of ways you can practice entrepreneurship, given the definition, without just creating a company. Mm-hmm. Social entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, medical practice entrepreneurship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Edupreneurship, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of ways to skin this cat. But if you're smart, and most of us who do this, first, we're not necessarily any smarter than anybody else, in my opinion, but we get the game. So if you are an innerpreneur, now what I call an innerpreneur is somebody like you, and probably me, that there was something inside of us that said, I don't know, medicine is, I like it, it's fun, it's what I want to, but it's kind of constricting. It doesn't really trip my trigger totally. Now, if you go to your medical school or residency interview, because I'm asked, I want to be a physician entrepreneur, I'm a pre-med, I want to be a physician entrepreneur. What do I need to say to get into medical school? Or a residency, for that matter. I want to be where do I do a residency if I want to be a physician entrepreneur? And my answer is, keep your mouth shut.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I have this sort of side thing about what the present medical school interview looks like. So it's okay to not be terribly authentic at that stage of the game. If you want to fix the system, you got to get into the system. And you're not going to get into the system. Now, if you start telling people, and I have this kind of thought experiment, which is so you've been Hassan, you've been designated and accepted the enviable position of being the community member at the George Washington University School of Medicine, and you are on the admissions committee. So you're going to sit and you're going to listen to all these kids and get so, and you ask the question to me, Arlen, typical softball question. Why do you want to be a doctor? And how'd you get here? And why do you want to go to GW? And, the usual stuff.
Right.
And I say, you know what? I only want the MD. I only want the degree so I can get credibility and credentials, because I really have very little interest in practicing medicine face to face, seeing patients for my entire clinical career, like I have done. I am a dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
Kids these days, no, that's not the Gen Z mentality. So I'm thinking, and I'll tell you that when I talk to med students and residents, and I ask them, 100 students in a room, how many of you anticipate, following completion of your training, only seeing patients for the rest of your clinical career? The last time I did that was a couple of months ago at a different medical school.
Wow.
Zero. This is a different medical student persona.
Wow.
It's a different attitude. And that's why I'm suggesting that some of the people listening to this webinar who are fellows or early career people in the College of Surgeons are shaking their heads saying, yeah, how come you don't teach us this stuff? And if you ask 100 doctors, if you knew then what you knew now, what do you wish you had learned in medical school? The business of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, I think is educational malpractice, that we don't do it. But that, right. So that's why you're hearing sort of the anger in my voice.
Yeah.
It's not exactly a presidential debate, but that's what, I mean, that's, and again, I'm pissed off. I'm angry. I don't like it that we don't do this, because it's not fair. It's not right. And what's important, more important, you're foregoing an opportunity as a medical student, as a professional society, as a residency program, to give people the tools they need to serve their communities.
Mm-hmm.
You're not listening to your client, your customer. You're not giving them what they want. Entrepreneurship 102.
Mm-hmm.
Figure out what people want and give it to them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. That's my point.
Absolutely. So you've had, certainly an interesting career, and with that first endeavor and sort of entree into bringing an idea to market, having some challenges in doing so, and then realizing, hey, there's a system that needs to be corrected, needs to be fixed, and we need to be a part of fixing that system. What have you done since in terms of bringing ideas to market? Because right. I imagine some folks are sitting here and they're like, yep, Arlen, got it. I got the right mindset. I know right. I got to learn about stuff. I'm going to maybe right. get an MBA, but I got an idea. Like, what do I need to do now? Like, what can you share with the audience that were right. your sort of right. battle wounds and scars from, being right. successful and also right. failing at this right. very important work?
So you and I would call this, and the people listening to this would call this clinical judgment. Mm-hmm. You screw it up in the OR, something goes south. Well, you didn't. Things just went south. Mm-hmm. And it's that old saying, clinical judgment is from experience and experience is from mistakes.
Right.
So what did I learn? first of all, let me just give you a sort of a list of a sort of my highlight failure reel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what am I? So I've done a fair number of, or attempted to do some things in digital health.
Mm-hmm.
I created again, when I say I mean a team and other people, but we
Sure.
created something called MedBoy, which was a medical voyage, MedBoy. It was a platform for medical tourism. And the
Mm-hmm.
basic idea was to connect doctors to doctors around the world, instead of creating websites where patients go on the website and who the heck knows where they're going
Mm-hmm.
or whether that person has any qualifications. I'm still pretty involved actually in sort of medical tourism and that kind of stuff. That company died because I believe, there's two basic reasons why your startup will fail. One, you don't create a product that customers are willing and able to buy.
Mm-hmm.
And two, you don't have a viable business model. Basically, a business model is how you're going to make money doing this.
Exactly.
And I didn't know S from S when it came from doing this. So I just figured, well, I got a computer scientist, I got a digital guy. We'll put up a website. I think it's a good idea. Let's just do it. And we did, and it failed. Surprise, surprise, surprise. So that's what I learned from that. When it comes to the optical detection of cancer gadget,
Mm-hmm.
I did that within an academic setting. What I learned is, and this gets to the means, remember,
Mm-hmm.
mindset, motivation, means.
Mm-hmm.
The two basic means are you have to have money
Mm-hmm.
and you have to have the right people on the bus. The other stuff, IP and physical plant and equipment, all that, that's easy. Not easy, but you get it.
Right.
I don't need to tell you, the academic mindset, particularly in research and development, is different than the industrial mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Again, what I'm saying is gradually changing, but essentially it really hasn't changed all that much. I mean, we haven't reformed medical education since like 1910. Flexner. So
Right.
don't you think it's time? So
Another.
anyway, that's now. What did I learn from that? You have to have a sense of urgency. And if you deal with people, again, I'm not casting dispersions. I learned a lot from these people. But if you are trying to accelerate something and get speed to value, you can't fool around. The clock is ticking, the money is running out, the interest is waning. And if the people on your team do not have a focus on a sense of urgency, you shouldn't deal with them. I mean, to me, the single biggest lesson I learned is figure out who you're going to play with. Who are the people that they're the most important thing?
Right.
And if you have scientists and engineers who are more interested in getting grants and doing experiments and writing papers and getting grad students and being on committees, that's not going to cut it. So that's what I learned from that. Now, I've also been involved in multiple edupreneurship activities, educational entrepreneurship, creating value in educational programs, either through platforms, curriculum development, competencies, etc. I would call this a sort of a success. I mean, when I look at what's my box score, I'm thinking 2, 1, and 2 or something like that, but and a bunch of stuff that I don't even put on it, like the runs and the hits and the errors and all that.
Right. Right.
The only thing that matters, what was the final score? And in this particular case, I was fortunate to participate in the early development of what is now Medscape.
Oh.
And that's an interesting story. Two guys, former students and collaborators when I was working, actually, my first job was at Denver General, shock and trauma unit, safety net hospital, all that. And these guys were emergency medicine docs. Long story short, they created arguably one of the first digitized point of care repositories
Mm-hmm.
that was confined to emergency medicine. So when a patient walks through the doors with signs and symptoms X, what are you supposed to do? It wasn't a textbook. It was, what are you supposed to do? It was like a digital Washington manual for emergency room docs.
Mm.
Long story short, that evolved into what it's something called e-medicine, which subsequently incorporated the entire spectrum of medicine, every specialty, including cardiothoracic surgery, including surgery, all the subspecialties. And that was eventually bought by WebMD and rebranded as Medscape. So right now, I'm the editor-in-chief of the otolaryngology facial plastic surgery section. But I learned a tremendous amount about doing that. Because again, I had no clue how to do any of this stuff.
Right.
And incidentally, it took us 2.5 years to publish the otolaryngology book, which to this day is still up and being upgraded and refreshed and all that. And there's all kinds of competition, Hippocrates, all that stuff. And then there's the whole AI piece, which how's that informing these point of care continuums. So I would call that a success. Now, did I make a lot of money doing that? No. I was an idiot. I didn't know anything about it. All I knew was I wanted to accomplish something that I felt was an unmet need. And most doctors just kind of want to do some good. But why not do well by doing good? I'm not criticizing, and God knows I do a lot of free stuff. But why not? As long as you're not stepping over the boundaries, you're not conflicting with the ethos of medicine, you're not getting called before the state board of medical examiners for doing bad stuff, that kind of thing. Why not? So and I think actually, well, not actually, I know from personal experience that these entrepreneurial activities, success or failure, make you a better doctor. It makes you a better clinician. It changes your mindset, how you approach things. It makes you better at getting into the head of the customer, design thinking, and addressing the patient and community needs instead of just doing a bunch of stuff, the hammer and the nail thing.
Right.
So I think there are many, many reasons why this is a good idea.
Yeah.
Just from personal experience. And then finally, I was participant in the creation of our MD MBA program at Colorado. Now, I bring that up because inevitably, someone on this call is going to say, "Should I get an MBA?"
Right.
I mean, the two most common questions I get is four. Where do I find money? Where do I find money? Where do I find money? And should I get an MBA? And the answer, the first three is another webinar. But the MBA part is, here's my thought. Again, I graduated business school in 1984. I was the only doctor in the cohort. I was the only health professional. That was 1984. Fast forward 2050, I don't know, whatever, all these years.
Why did you get an MBA at that time? Because that was definitely ahead of the MBA crowd of
exactly. And I did it, one, because I found myself more interested in reading the Wall Street Journal than the New England Journal. And two, at the time I was in private practice, and I thought, well, this is going to help me run my practice. Neither of which were valid assumptions. So fast forward. I don't know what I was thinking, but I figured, maybe this is a way to get people into the business of medicine game. So we created the MD MBA program at Colorado. I think we were like the 9th program in the country to do this. So a couple of facts. There's about 200 medical schools in the United States, allopathic and osteopathic. Probably about 60 to 65% of them have combined MD MBA programs. Most of which, in my view, now I'm speaking about entrepreneurship. Like, will an MD MBA help you be more successful as a surgeon entrepreneur? in my view, and again, it's the 70-20-10 rule, how people learn. 70% of what we learn as adults is experiential. 20% comes from the people we know. 10% comes from watching stuff like this. You forget it. It's not relevant. And even if it were, you'd forget it.
Mm-hmm.
So that said, if you are trying to be a surgeon entrepreneur, should you get an MBA? Well, here are my thoughts. First of all, I think MBA, physician MBA programs are about, again, 4 C's: credentials, uh, um, credibility, contacts, and content. The most important part of those 4 C's are the contacts you make. And I'm not making this up. People have looked at the value of a Harvard Business School MBA. The answer is your roommate is now the governor of Indiana.
Exactly.
And some people have characterized it as the most important, the most expensive meetup in the world. So I don't really think it's now, far be it for me to say, I'm a professional educator. Far be it for me to say, no, don't get more education. I'm just saying, do the cost benefit, particularly if you're $265,000 in debt as a second-year medical student,
Right.
with no intention of doing a residency, which is a whole other story. So I just think, and so bottom line, it's an individual decision. Be careful doing the cost benefit. I think most MBA programs are second grade at best. You know, if you go to Harvard or MIT or Wharton or Berkeley or any of those places, there's a top 10 group that's basically going to be a Pareto effect. And most, 10% of the programs are contributing 90% of the impact. Now, if you just want to do it to get the initials after your name, and I understand, we as physicians, that's pretty important. The more stuff you have after your name, that good for you, good for me. Like, I'm happy. I get that. But that comes at a price and an expense. And what's more, who do you think pays for these MD MBAs? The tuition. We're talking $70,000 to $100,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
You're already $286,000 average debt as a medical student. Who do you think pays for this stuff? The taxpayers, you and me, if you default on the loan. And the highest number of people that default on these loans, forget the politics of student loan forgiveness, the highest defaults are in graduate students. So I just think, so what's the answer? We should teach this stuff in medical schools. We shouldn't delegate it to business schools.
Mm-hmm.
Biomedical innovation is a distinct academic domain, in my opinion. This is not creating electric cars. Some people want to make it that way, but that's not the way it is. We need to teach this stuff. It should be mandatory. We should teach the business of medicine, and we should teach and monitor and follow people in innovation and entrepreneurship. And my final point is, what value are all these MD MBAs, including myself, contributing to the system? And I'm making the argument, I don't really think there's any difference. It's been shown that it makes absolutely positively no difference where you went to medical school as far as how good of a doctor you are. None. There's a false negative and a false positive. Just because you went to Harvard doesn't mean you're going to be a really good doctor. Just because you went to the so-called second-rate school doesn't mean you're not going to be a good doctor. The person who graduates last, they call doctor.
Yes.
So it's the same deal. I think it's the same thing. So I just don't see. Now, if you are interested in managing a health system, like you want a corner office and you're going to make 7 figures, being the chief whatever in the hospital, the unfortunate reality is people think they have to check off the box to get street cred to get the job. I don't really know how much more administrators actually contribute to the system, whether you have an MD, MBA or not. So my whole point of this is show me the beef. And when it comes to will it help you be a better surgeon entrepreneur, B, a more successful private practitioner or work in an independent? In my view, no.
Yeah.
Help you, yeah, it's interesting. You get to meet people, you get a little different perspective, fine. But it seems to me that 70,000 a year, that's a pretty expensive daycare center.
Yeah, very expensive. Well, you've been very generous with your time. I wanna, as we kind of come to the end of our great discussion here, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that I think is also very important when one considers, thinks about, or even endeavors to embark on this journey of entrepreneurship as a surgeon, particularly, and certainly as a doctor. And that is, and wait, before I do that, I do want to say you were remiss. I know is implied, but you didn't mention being a co-founder of Soapy as one of the big hits. And I would say that
Right. Well, I
I like
think that's right. I think that's a win.
yeah, I'd
Yeah.
like to personally thank you for that because
Thank
you
you.
have created a platform and a forum, and I know I've benefited from much of the material that you and the colleagues that are leading the organization have put out, and have created this community for us to, meet each other and bounce ideas off of. So thank you
Yeah.
for that
Sure.
and all the work that you've done. So when you think about this sort of existential question that I think all of us face, at different stages of our career, certainly as we pursue healthcare and certainly a surgical discipline, about fulfillment and success. You talked about an entrepreneur and as a physician, I think it's fair to say that people in healthcare go in with, some sort of altruistic DNA and composition of really trying to genuinely help people. As you mentioned, it is important to be compensated for the work that you do in and outside of, healthcare and the confines of your
Right.
practice. And certainly if you bring value to society in a tremendous way, you should be commensurately rewarded for that. I
Right.
think that's fair. So when you think about, your experiences, both on the clinical side, on the academic side, and then, all of the work and experiences you've had as an entrepreneur, and thinking about our audience that have probably, sort of had contact and have lived lives in all of those domains: academia, clinical practice, and now embarking on entrepreneurship. What has been rewarding in all of those aspects of your life and your experience? And what would you say is important for someone to keep in mind as an entrepreneur in terms of what they use as their definition of success? Because I don't think it's money, and that's my humble opinion. But some people may be sitting in this audience saying, "I want to go make
Right.
millions and millions of dollars, or
Right.
become a billionaire," and that's great, that's fine. But I would say that that doesn't necessarily define the greatest measure of success. I'd just like
Right.
to hear your
Sure.
opinion. Certainly, there's no right or wrong answer here, but I think that would be
Right.
a good way to
Right.
wrap up our conversation.
So a couple points. Success does not lead to happiness. In fact, the literature would say, in terms of the positive psychology literature, that happiness leads to success.
Mm.
So the issue is what's going to make you happy, not what's going to make you successful. Because God knows we know all kinds of successful people, they're miserable. So
Right.
the issue is what's going to make you happy. You don't want to come home, kick the dog, and yell at your spouse and all that. So, okay, what's going to make you happy? The short answer, my view is what you're doing aligned with your values? So then you got to do, well, what do I value? And there's actually something called the values deck. There's 52 cards with a word that describes 52 values, and you pick the top 5.
Mm.
That's an introspective exercise that is not easy to come to. We're talking about unraveling your entire life onion to figure out what trips your trigger. Okay. So that then devolves into what I say is you make it personal, but you don't take it personally. What does that mean? And that gets to one of the M's, motivation. What is motivating you to want to do this and to continue to do it? So, in order for you to get to that point, most entrepreneurs or people with an entrepreneurial mindset are either normally or abnormally driven by an intrinsic motivator. And to your point, money is an extrinsic motivator. That's not going to get you there. It actually will buy you happiness, but only to the extent that it gives you wiggle room to deal with life. Like stuff happens. You have a car accident. You got to buy a new car. Okay, you got the money to buy a new car versus if you didn't have the money to buy. And so now you're in all kinds of distress. How am I going to get to work? I'm going to lose my job. So it just makes it easier to deal with the inevitable slings and arrows. Mm-hmm. So that said, it has to be a very strong internal motivator. And typically that internal motivation comes from, like me, I'm pissed off. I'm not letting go of this. This is like the dog on the car. I'm not letting go of this until I see something happen. But there are other internal motivations, and a lot of them have to do with you had a horrible experience with the sick care system. You had a child that has an incurable disease. You had a circumstance where now you're in the sandwich generation and you're all fed up with how grandma's being taken care of 1,600 miles away from us. Or I need a heart transplant and the system is just screwed up. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to die because of guys like you that can't fix it. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to fix it, that kind of thing. And the lore is filled with these personal stories.
Right.
Now, I said normal or pathologic. And there are lots of entrepreneurial psychopathologies, depression, ADHD. I mean, some could argue me, overachievers, drug and alcohol, you name it. I mean, there are all kinds of things that motivate people, but it's better than stealing hubcaps and being a drug addict. So channel that energy into something that's constructive, that will make a difference. But 99 times out of 100, you will fail. I guarantee it. If you're not having complications doing surgery, you're not doing enough cases. It's the same thing that's going to happen. You can guarantee you're going to fail. Now, that means you need to get up, get yourself up, shake the dust off, and keep on trying again. But that's hard. This is very hard stuff. And if you're not, and you pay a price, you have to make trade-offs, whether it's family, so-called work-life balance, personal recognition. My parents are going to kill me if I drop out of medical school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those are my takes. You really have to get into what trips your trigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you don't find that, now, the last point I'll make is the cruel hoax is many times you don't know what that is. So if you're asking me what's your passion, I think that's really a stupid question. You have no idea what it could be because you haven't tried anything else. You haven't experimented. Again, it gets to the CEO thing. Experiment with your career, experiment with options, spend a little, learn a lot.
Yeah. Don't
bet the farm on it, but put your toe in the water, whatever metaphor you want to use, but just try it and see what happens. And it's just a learning experience, and then learn from your failures and get up and try it again.
Yeah.
So bottom line, make it personal. Don't take it personally. Be absolutely positively willing to give up your ideas, but do not give up on yourself.
Right. Excellent, excellent words of wisdom. A very, very good place for us to close our conversation. And hopefully, we've whetted everyone's appetite to learn so much more about Dr. Myers and all the great work that you are doing. And I would say, personally, Arlen, thank you so much for spending this time with me and being so generous with your time and your wisdom and sharing your experiences and expertise with our audience. And for those that are even not at the American College of Surgery, but they get the opportunity to see this. I hope that they are not only inspired but also motivated to go out and pursue their path and learn more.
Yeah,
Uh,
thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. But I would return the compliment and say, if people haven't read about your story and what you've done, you should. And
no,
thanks for your service and all the
very
stuff that
kind.
you've accomplished. But you're a good example of everything we're talking about.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you so much for saying that. All right. Well, thank you so much for participating and being a part of this special showing for Opportunity Revolution: How to Be a Successful Surgical Entrepreneur. I was with Dr. Arlen Myers, uh, co-founder and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
All right. I'm going to end recording.